So, Berto, I don't know if you know this, but I am finishing up my book on grief. Did you know this?
Yes, you mentioned it. I'm so impressed by you.
Oh, I can't tell if you're being sarcastic or not.
I am definitely not being sarcastic.
Well,
but
now I really can't tell.
I can't say I'm being proud of you because I'm not the one writing the book, but I am impressed by you.
Yeah, being proud of someone, there's different versions of it, right?
Yeah.
Like you could be proud of your kid or proud of helping a team or something. But yeah, I think being proud.
You and I got into
because we're associated with each other.
You and I got into this debate years ago on the podcast. Yeah, because I'm like, I don't understand when people say I'm so proud of our football team this year. I'm like, why? You're not doing anything. And they're like, well, I don't know if the fans support the team and blah blah.
Which
blah.
side was I taking?
You were saying that you're proud is fine.
Yeah,
and I understand it's common parlance.
Well, there's different versions.
Yeah. The one the specific one that I was railing, or that I was choosing not to participate in, is I didn't want to say I was proud of my kids. I wanted to say I'm impressed by my kids and let them be proud of themselves, kind of thing.
Yeah,
but it's just the
thought that counts. Whatever the kids are receiving is the importance.
Yeah.
But I am writing this book about grief, whether or not you're proud of me.
I'm so impressed.
I was having a literal shower thought this morning and thought that I wanted to, throughout the book, I am sprinkling in different examples from my life about grief and loss to not only ground the theory and the research, but also for my own sake to some extent. And a lot of the processing I've done of these various different griefs have benefited me in a lot of ways. And one of the things I have also been trying to do is emphasize that grief is not just about death. Of course it is, but a lot of the losses that we experience, significant losses that we experience throughout our life, have nothing to do with death. And it's at the point where books about grief will assume that it's always about death. They'll say, bereavement and grief, rather than thinking about all the various losses. Particularly attachment loss can be a massive. I mean, the whole reason why we grieve death of an attachment figure is because we no longer have a relationship with them. So that relationship can end in a number of ways, through death or through abandonment, for example,
right?
Or divorce or breaking up or whatever. So it's important, I think, to emphasize that. And I was having a little shower thought today about including in the book, because I'm swimming in the book every day, all day long, I was thinking about including your abandonment as a child in my book. And exploring, and so I thought about writing about it this morning. I thought, I'll start sprinkling that in somewhere in the book. And, some of the examples are short, some are long. And I thought, this one might be kind of a long one because I imagine a lot of people have some version of abandonment growing up. Most commonly, anecdotally anyway, it's a parent through divorce moves away, usually the dad, and there's a loss there.
Yeah.
And we also tend not to think about kids as experiencing loss and grief when they absolutely do.
Yeah, of course they do. Yeah.
And it also brings up this topic of, well, how do we help 5-year-olds or 10-year-olds grieve exactly? We have at least some semblance of how we would help an adult, kind of, but we particularly don't know what we would do with kids, how it would look like, that kind of stuff. So I wanted to include it in my book, but I thought I would be going off memory, and I would also be reinterpreting a lot of our conversations over the years, both on and off the microphone, about your reaction for decades upon being abandoned by your mom when you were 3 years old. And I thought, well, I am podcasting with Berto tonight, so we could talk about it. I could interview him and see what he thinks, and walk ourselves through a lot of the examples, and if there are other ones too, and reframing it, because we've talked about it as being later effects of abandonment, but not specifically, I don't believe, at least very often, as a part of grief, right?
Yeah.
So I texted you, and you said, no, don't make me do it on the podcast. And I said,
I begged you.
I said, well, you're a part owner and another employee, so you're going to do it, my friend. And no, just joking.
I believe you said tough titties.
You said, okay, let's do it, as you often do. But I asked you in a way. I was just like, this, you're not going to mention anything you haven't already mentioned, but it could be a little overly focused. That might be a little much.
Well, and it is painful, right? I mean, so every time we discuss my trauma or things like that, I always feel it, sometimes more than others. So
right,
yeah.
And I think more recently you've been more aware and more willing to say, "Ooh, I'm feeling something."
That's right.
So feel free to have that as well. It's human to be so. But I thought I would start by explaining the prevailing model of grief that I am highlighting heavily in the book, which is called the dual process model of grief or bereavement. And this model was developed in relatively recently, and has a lot to do with empirical evidence based on how people actually grieve, rather than these models that are famous or that are used often that are not based on actual empirical evidence, or it's based kind of on anecdote, like the 5 stages of grief, for example.
Oh, really? That was just more like, I think it happens this way.
Well, I could go into detail. I detail that all in the book. There's a theme throughout the book of reviewing the history and also the models, both Freud, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, others, and going through history and seeing how much we're still living in that legacy. And although these figures added a lot and gave a lot to us, they were working off fairly limited data because the research industry in psychology just wasn't what it was, didn't have the funding.
They couldn't run an internet survey?
Yeah. And so, particularly with Freud, because it was basically non-existent, he had to just go off of what he was observing, and he was a genius in that, the things that he observed based on very little information, sort of like Einstein. It's just like he was working off of, some observation and a lot of math and a lot of genius creativity thought, and building off of other iterative steps along the way. Anyway, point is that more recently there are some Dutch researchers, Strobe and Schutt, who have developed this dual process model that is much more fitting, and I find it to be flexible, but it's so broad and flexible that it's sometimes hard to apply. And here's how it goes. So the model, the theory is that as we go through a significant loss, the natural healing, grieving process is an oscillation between 2 different modes. You have one mode where you are grieving and feeling and remembering and yearning and crying and laughing and reminiscing and asking and exploring and all those things, the things that we associate with active grief or of emotions and waves of grief that come over us, okay? The other mode is rebuilding, maybe even going into denial initially, avoiding, moving on, replacing, moving forward, rebuilding.
Okay, so like travel is just a thing that happens in that mode?
Is this a joke?
Well, yeah, you just said they go to Egypt.
Denial. It's like, you got to get that joke in at some point.
Last time you chastised me when I didn't.
I chastise you?
Yeah, you were like, I'm surprised there was no denial joke.
Oh, right. So I'm just going to call these 2 modes, because they call them loss orientation versus, I can't even remember. It's not a very catchy. So I'm using the 2 labels of feeling your feelings versus rebuilding.
Okay.
So these are the 2 modes, and it's hard to know exactly, but the way that I apply this is that psychologically and physically, if you will, because our psychology is a part of our physiology, and we, through our natural processing, the idea is that as we go through a significant loss, there's a lot of reorganizing of neurons that have to occur. That's just one way of putting it. We have to adjust not only psychologically, but also practically, if our spouse dies, for example, we have to now take on more parenting or find someone else. We have to deal with their Facebook account or something,
Yeah.
But there's also the adjustment of, oh, he's no longer there,
Right.
waking up in the morning and just that feeling of like, geez, where is he? That kind
Right.
of, and so,
and it's a very obvious thing. Like when I've lost, grandparents or people that I knew from a distance, let's say, and you don't have the daily in your face reminder that they're not there. It's sort of like, but it's, like in a way when I've lost a pet, it was every day I was like, oh yeah, they're not there. They're not
Right.
there. They're not there.
Yeah. So all these things can be factors in how things play out. But the idea is that we have a physical, natural oscillation between those two modes. And they're really quite distinct. In one mode, we're not really thinking about it. We're not feeling the feelings. We're not either ready to or we're ready to rebuild. It depends on how we look at it. And everyone has their own pace. And we vacillate back and forth. For some people, they might go into one mode immediately after the loss for 6 months before they're ready to go to the other mode, depending on which mode that is. And none of it is healthy or unhealthy. It's just natural.
I see.
Whereas someone else might oscillate between the two modes throughout the day for the first 6 months. It just depends. But the key is, in my opinion, is that the natural process that we want to grieve is impinge upon. Their barriers are put in place externally and internally because of the vast array of problems in our society about grief and loss and emotion and not being productive in a capitalistic society and all that kind of stuff.
Like if you're at work or at school and you start crying because you're oscillating,
Right.
That's not okay.
Right. Or 18 months later, your body wants to grieve and feel and reminisce. You either won't let yourself do it yourself because you're like, it's 18 months later. I've already done that. Or I'm holding on to it too long. I'm dwelling on it. Or other people will shame you.
Yeah. Or 2 days later when you're trying to deal with something because you're trying to rebuild something, someone's like, how could you be thinking about that?
Yeah.
You just lost this person.
I saw a post today on Reddit about Kobe Bryant's wife, right? Kobe Bryant died, I think, a number of years. I can't remember how many years ago.
During the pandemic, I think, right?
Yeah, I think it was like 5 years ago he died. And someone posted that it's disgusting because she's dating someone else and she's pregnant or something. Turns out she's probably not pregnant, but it doesn't really matter because everyone was really angry at her.
She should never move on.
Well, they won't say that.
Yeah.
But that's the implication. And it's just so
Or
stupid.
it's for the public to decide if and when she should be able to move on, and in what way.
Right. And I review a number of examples like this in my book. Whether it's often a lot of famous people. Anyway, so like another example I write about in the book is the funniest home videos guy from Full House.
The
comedian.
Alanis Morissette's.
No.
Yeah.
No.
The guy whose that song was based on?
Yeah, he's still alive. The other guy's dead.
Oh, Bob Saget. You mean?
Yeah, Bob Saget.
Yeah.
So Bob Saget,
Because they both did America's Funniest Videos, right?
No, just Bob Saget.
Oh, okay.
So Bob Saget died, and his wife was apparently going on Tinder or something, or started dating 2 years after Bob Saget had died, and she was being attacked. And I read about that. She responded on that. Anyway, point is that there's a lot of barriers, and that's just the obvious Twitter backlash or barriers, but there are so many internalized notions, even notions that are more subtle, like the stages of grief that we've all internalized and trying to force that process, right? Like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to be now in the bargaining phase, so why am I sliding back to the other phase when that's not when I'm supposed to be moving forward? And there's all these, even in the clinical world, there's these cutoff points, like after 12 months, if you're still significantly in distress, there's something wrong with you.
Man.
I go through all this kind of stuff.
Sure.
And some of it is right-headed, some of it's wrong-headed. But the point is that For you, after your mom left you when you were 3, there began a natural process of grieving. Now, she wasn't dead, and also now I'm realizing that it's a complicated loss in that no one, you included, but even your dad, wouldn't know if the loss was permanent, right? Looking back, we now know that you basically had no contact or no significant contact with her for a couple years, right?
Not so. The way it worked, if I can piece it together, was certainly the first n number of days. Like it might have been a month or 3 weeks. I don't know. Neither my dad or I knew where she had gone, right? Then, like my dad knew, but I still like didn't know. And then for a long time after, I didn't see her, and that long time after might have been 1 or 2 years. Yeah, I don't know exactly.
Okay, I mean you're young.
Yeah, but it was, as far as I'm concerned, it was a whole other lifetime, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
And
So
in essence, you didn't have a significant relationship with her, maybe ever after that, really.
yeah,
But it wasn't until you moved up to the States, to Tacoma when you were 15.
That's right.
That you would have daily contact with her. And even then it
sort
was...
of, yeah. But then I'm a teenager, and I was only in the house for 3 years, going to school, busy with a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And she also isn't the most... She didn't like turn a new leaf with you.
Just personality wise, yeah. She doesn't. Especially back then, it wasn't her default behavior to be like, "Hey, let's sit down, let's hug, let's talk about what happened." That wasn't really a thing.
Right. Yeah. So for you began a process of grieving.
Right.
You could, I guess, say that after a month it was clear what was happening, and then began the process. Now you're 3. So what does that look like? And I don't fault parents for doing what they can to help a kid in a situation. I guess a more common scenario, like I said, would be divorce, or would be a grandparent that's close to the kid dying. Or, honestly, now I think about it, it could even be a nanny, right? You have as a kid, you
you get attached to people.
Yeah, you have a nanny from 2 to 3 for a year. And as a parent, you're just like, well, it's just a year. It's not that big of a deal. But to the kid, it's literally all their memories involve this person.
I mean, we talked about this because that happened to me again with my aunt. Because when I moved from Massachusetts to Columbia, my dad had to stay in the States. So it happens with my dad. So first my mom goes away. Then I'm, of course, like, where's mom? And then my dad has to, he flies me to Columbia, and then he comes back. So now I'm in Columbia with my grandparents and my aunt. And my aunt basically becomes my mommy, right? And I really get attached to her, of course. And then she moves to the States because she's going to move to San Francisco.
When you were how old?
So I went back when I think I was 3 or almost 3, and she moved, I think, a year later. So I was with her for 9 months to a year, some amount of time, and then she leaves, right? So it was another, I lost my second mom.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, in the adult mind, it's like, well, no, you're not losing. She's moving to a different country. And she's only been your replacement mom for 9 months to a year. I mean, come on. But for a little baby, that's everything, right? That's the whole life. And then my grandma becomes my grandma and her sister become sort of like my surrogate moms, right? So I kind of hopped around. But yeah, so I can understand what you're saying, that it's not just about your literal parent, and it's not even about permanent loss. It can be temporary loss. And I think probably the younger you are, the more those things seem like forever.
Oh yeah. Well, let's take a break. When we get back, let's continue. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, back from the break. So another element to, at least the way that I apply the dual process model of grieving, is that this oscillation never ends, especially when it comes to significant losses. There isn't an acceptance phase or a time limit. There's no stages, and it comes back around. We oscillate between these two places for the rest of our lives. for example, it wouldn't be unusual at the age of 30 for someone in your shoes to have a wave of intense feeling, right? Even if you had been grieving, you know what I mean?
Which literally happened for sure.
Yeah, but especially if you hadn't been given a chance to grieve, right?
Yeah.
So this led me to a question as to what would healthy grieving have looked like if, for example, I was there for as of me now, and I could dictate how the family dealt with things. Even if I consider the separations that you went through with your dad and your aunt, what overarching guide or approach to you would I think have helped? And it's hard to describe, but the way that it should look, because I've worked with young people in situations, families in situations like this, is that it would perhaps even in a 4-year-old manner explaining to you what grief is, that there are these two modes and that both are fine and that you want to listen to your heart. That might be a little confusing, but I think with 4-year-old language and with enough explanation, maybe there's like a book on the dual process that you can read at night or something. I think would be a good basis, because I'm basically applying what I typically do with adults to you as a 4-year-old. So there would be some version of that, and then there would be an invitation for you to initiate questions or thoughts or activities, and there would be there definitely would be some priming of the pump, because if I just told you, hey, for whatever reason, I have like sixth sense in my head. I'm like an invisible, hallucinated therapist with a kid,
right,
just walking around with you.
I see dead hallucinations.
Yeah, and I would say, here, let's try one way of grieving for 2 minutes, and then you can just know what it looks like. And
Sure.
Or I would do it myself. Like when I think about my cat that died, this is one way that I grieve. I think about my cat. I cry. I might write a song about my cat, or
Right.
whatever. Look at pictures, feel the feelings, recognize that it's over, that kind of thing. And I would do that with you, because if you've never seen, which isn't normal in any society really, at least the breadth of expressions of grief, then how would you know what that looked like, particularly when you're a child?
Yeah.
So I would model that or guide a mini activity. The reason why I say mini is because I wouldn't want to force you into grieving if your oscillation is such that you're actually wanting to rebuild in that
It's
moment.
like trying them on for size, just kind of get a feel for
Yeah. And I would gauge that with you as a 3, 4, or 5-year-old, meaning that I would see how you reacted, because that's a big part of therapy, is monitoring how things, this is why human beings are important when it comes to therapy. You can't just read a book,
Yeah.
It would definitely involve me talking. Maybe I'd be a ghost to all your family. And, again, best case scenario, your mom doesn't move away. Your mom just, she can certainly leave your dad, and she could certainly get to safety if she was concerned about that.
Right.
But she wouldn't not be in the same town with you.
Yeah. And by the way, I should point out that no matter, even if she had taken me, I would have experienced loss, right? Because then I would have lost my dad.
Right. So, but I'm not gonna. I'm saying I'm not gonna mess with
Right.
any of the details. But I would talk with your mom and say you have to have daily, frequent contact with him. I guess over the phone, since we're talking about 1978 or something, and that has to be involved, obviously, for a number of reasons, but also because of the grieving. You are the primary, if we're just focusing on the grief process of your child, you are the primary guide and venue upon which your child will be grieving. Mm-hmm. Even though he's grieving about you, you are also the one that will be facilitating if he was grieving the loss of a dog that died, you would be the one that would be processing that with him. It just happens to be he's lost you to a large extent, or it's changed.
Right.
And you are, and obviously your dad, other people, even if you come back to Colombia, your aunt would be involved, everyone would be involved. I would explain to a process to them, and they would do the same thing. I would coach them on how to do what I'm doing with you as well.
Right. I could see how this would apply even if there had been a death and not just a moving away, right? Because in the case of the death, well, okay, so the person in question whom you are grieving can't actually call you every day, but the people around you, your other parent, your other relatives, they can be there having those experiences with you. So it's like, I could see, because I could imagine, well, not only imagine, like, obviously no one knew this, right? Like, so, but I could imagine even nowadays, even if someone might be going to therapy themselves, maybe they lose a significant other and they have a child, they might not be as aware that they need to have these conversations with the child.
Even though your dad's a child psychologist.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, he was going through something, so it's not.
Well, and I will also throw out there that the one thing, because the more I tell my story, by the way, every time I tell my story, like, remember it was on the podcast that I had that realization. We had this realization of that I didn't have one loss. I had many losses compounded. So the more I tell the story and think about it, the more I'm like, well, how the hell did I end up somewhat put together?
Yeah.
And it all does come down to, even though they didn't know the structure and the proper techniques, I was shown a lot of time and love, and I did have the conversations with my grandma. So some things...
Conversations about loss?
Well, about my mom and things like that. Yeah, well, but I also don't remember the details. But I know that my grandma showed...
that being explicitly a topic. Like it wasn't taboo for little Beto to talk about mom being gone.
There were taboos between the two families. Like, I remember that, which I'm sure didn't help anything, because when, like, the families got together, like, if my grandma came over or something, like, we couldn't talk about certain topics. And so that actually didn't help. But, like, in the house where I lived with my grandma, I remember we could have conversations.
Okay.
Now, they weren't structured. She didn't maybe know the right things.
Well,
but still,
No, for millennia, humans have been grieving properly without therapists.
Sure. And then the other thing that I think helped is, and we've talked about this too, it wasn't all on just one person, my grandma. Let's hope she gets it right? There was a big family. And a lot of them, like aunts, uncles, even older cousins, a lot of them were there, not all at the same time, but so, I got lucky in that regard, it like gave me a lot of structure. But undoubtedly, the damage was so hard that it still left these deep traumas.
So let's talk about those effects after the break. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, back from the break. Yeah. So that leads to the next and maybe the main part of this episode, which is to talk about examples of effects of complicated, delayed grief. Your grief was not allowed to progress normally after the loss. There was some grieving, it sounds like, which is great.
But I can tell you some examples of where that was shortcut, and not even necessarily on purpose. In those first few key amounts of time, I don't know if it was a month, 3 weeks, I don't know, but it seemed forever for me. We didn't know where.
And you remember that time.
I have moments of memory.
That's bizarre because for that age, it's strange.
Yeah. But I also have moments of memory even before this. So I have a few little memories. I have a memory from when I was 2 and I got a lightsaber for my birthday. Yeah. It's kind of,
But still, to remember multiple moments in the first month or two.
And I specifically remember asking my dad, like, where is my mom, right? And of course, he doesn't know. So I don't remember explicitly what he said, but I remember him trying to talk me through something. And the other thing, this part I don't explicitly remember, but I remember my dad telling me about it, and it seems very familiar, is that I would see my mom all over the place. I'd be like, I think that's my mom. Go, you gotta drive. That's my mom. That's my mom. And like he'd have to drive to like show me that it wasn't, you know?
Oh, okay. So this is good.
Yeah.
I didn't remember that second detail. I remember you having a very common experience, I think, particularly for kids, because you don't know how the world works, right? If you're 25 and your mom died, for example, and you saw your mom from across the street, a very quick executive function element would kick in and say, well, can't, but you still might chase the person down just to kind of
emotionally or whatever.
But as a kid, you don't have that.
As a kid, it's real,
right? Because you don't have the brain power to understand time and distance and that kind of thing. And it might not have even been explained to you. But at any rate, that's a very common thing that you will literally hallucinate your lost person. There's a number of theories about this. Mine is, I think, common to many people in this area, that our neurons are oriented in a certain way, and when we're used to, we habituate to certain things.
Yeah.
In a less attachment way, if you ever replace a couch or you add a lamp or something, when you walk through that room, it'll be very obvious that it's not there or there, right? Yeah. That's all you'll see. Be like, oh my God, it's not there anymore. Yeah. And when our brain will not have that person around, we feel like, well, they should be there.
Yeah.
And so we start to insert them. Also, there's a fantasy, psychoanalytically anyway, that we want them to be there, so we insert them into our lives because we're trying to wish fulfill. Anyway.
That makes sense.
But that second part, that your dad would actually spend a little bit of time and entertain it, which is great, actually. That's not the guaranteed way to do this, but in all likelihood, it is. And it's a sign, a little glimpse, because we're looking through a telescope into the past and trying to make out details, but we see this little detail of that your dad was flexible.
Yeah.
It must have been painful for him to see you going through that. He obviously had a lot of anger about your mom in general, but also the abandonment. And maybe even jealousy that you cared about her. There's just little things, right?
Yeah, probably.
and so he pushed past that and took the time out of his day, because you were probably doing things that you had to do, and he knew, okay, well, let's go with this. And because if I just say that's not your mom, and he's going to freak out. So so let's entertain this. And in that moment, one could frame it within the dual process that you were in the mode your body wanted to feel the feelings. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that we can kind of bank on with younger people, is that they have had fewer years to ingest and internalize all the stupid shit about grieving and emotions that we have in our society. So children will act more spontaneously, and if you give them the space, they will just naturally step into it because they don't know any better. And so in those moments you were, and your dad was allowing you could say that was, and that's definitely a part of feeling the feelings, is the yearning, which can be hallucinatory, or could be in the form
Interesting.
It could be the form of dreams. Your body was like, something's wrong, because that's a big part of that feeling of the feelings. There's various different aspects to it, but a major initial acute part of grief, when we're talking about the feelings mode, is something is fucking wrong.
Yeah.
And it's very bad. Something is very bad, and something is very wrong. Yeah. And I need that to be in the air. I can't just act like nothing is wrong, So then one way can be literally like, there's the thing, there's the mom, there's the... Yeah, because your heart is already yearning. Your heart is already wanting to search for her. We could almost think of it as an evolved mechanism.
Sure.
That when our tribe leaves us, or when mom wanders off away from the tribe a little bit too much, it would serve us to
like look everywhere for it. Yeah.
Right. To not stop until we find her.
Yeah.
And so the soul, the heart, the mind, the psyche will search. and that's normal. That's okay.
Right.
Even if it is irrational, we wouldn't say that about a 3-year-old, but if you're 35 and like when Ron died.
That's right.
When you were driving
we
around.
We were talking about that, yeah.
It's hard to know what was going on with you, but you were aimlessly and noticed yourself aimlessly while listening to Depeche Mode and stuff and Erasure, just driving around old places that you would go with him.
It was very odd because I certainly, as I was describing it to you, I hadn't thought of it as like trying to find him. I didn't know why I was going there.
Right. But it's a felt compulsion.
Yeah.
And it's an itch that has to be scratched. And if you hadn't done that, if you didn't have the space,
right,
or if you shamed yourself or didn't listen to yourself, then that need would not have been met. And something bad would have happened. So if we think about the story, I'm going to walk through the story beats. I wrote them down, and I don't know if these apply, and there's probably a lot more that I don't know, but we've talked enough about it that I was like, oh, I remember that. So one thing I remember you mentioning, in addition to what we've already talked about, is the apple.
Yep.
So tell me about that.
Yeah. So now there's some dispute whether it was literally an apple, but I remember it as an apple. So the day she left, my memory of it, and for the longest time, at this point in my life, I'm now 50, so the memory of it now feels more narrative. But for the longest time in my life, I felt the 3-dimensional memory of it. Is I was in our house where we were in Massachusetts, and she sat me down, turned on the TV. It was potentially Mr. Rogers or something, I don't remember, and she gave me a little apple, and then she left. So I was left watching TV, eating, and years later I would talk to my therapist about how this. I didn't know why I would stay up late watching TV, eating, as a almost compulsion. And who knows, but that was a thing that I was, the association that left in that moment was, I'm being left alone, but at least I have this TV and this apple, I didn't know in that moment, she didn't say to me, goodbye, I'm leaving you, right? I just knew she was leaving the house.
Yeah, this is really fascinating to think about, that decades later, you would feel this compulsion to sit in front of the TV and eat an apple.
Yeah.
And how do we frame that in grief, in the oscillation towards feeling the feelings? Because that's what that would be. Is it wanting your mom to return?
Right. Like maybe if I, obviously subconsciously, if I recreate the conditions, maybe.
Yeah. And or your body wanted to grieve, just be sad, think about it, process it, maybe express it, and your body was bringing you back to that moment to alert you, which can happen sometimes. Like with Ron's death, that's more recent. I don't know if you've experienced this, but when you're choosing an album to listen to, or you're choosing where to go for lunch or something, there might be this pull in a particular direction. It's always hard to know, and we might just be making stories about what's happening in our lives. But one way to interpret it is, my body, it's sort of like you get this rumbling in your stomach and you have to go to the bathroom all of a sudden. Your body is, it doesn't have to go right now. It doesn't have to grieve, but it kind of wants to. And it doesn't know how to tell you, or this is the way that the body tells the prefrontal cortex. And it is saying, I now want you to think.
Yeah.
I want you to reminisce. I want you to process. We have the space or the time, or it's been too long, or something triggered. Has anything like that happened with Ron, by the way?
That's interesting. So I've had a lot of moments about Ron, mostly, so definitely connections to music, because I will be listening to either Erasure or The Cure or Depeche Mode or any number of bands that we would have enjoyed. And even just the other day when I went and watched Simple Minds, but then the opening band was like Modern English, and then Soft Cell. It's like anytime it's 80s music, and especially a concert, it'll trigger memories, right? And then the other aspects are, like, for example, I saw this like poster, an image of a really cool poster that I knew is the kind of thing he would have loved, and so it just like makes me think like, this would have been a perfect gift for him or something like that. So I have a lot of those kinds of things.
So in those moments, so let's go with the poster.
Okay.
Do you, there's a sort of a flow chart. It's like you see the poster, there's maybe a Y in the road of this very quick, spontaneous decision. Do I acknowledge that I'm being triggered right now to think about Ron, or do I not?
Right.
I don't know if that happens for you.
Yeah, and actually, so with the poster, at least there's a positive aspect to it, which is something neat he would have enjoyed, But then there's a dark version of this, which has happened to me also in recently, which is if I have a drink at a restaurant because he had a problem with drinking, I immediately start thinking of Ron. And then I have this dichotomy of feelings. One is like kind of the disbelief of like, he's actually really gone. And then kind of feeling guilt, like, oh, I probably shouldn't even drink, like that. Coupled with, wait, I'm going to be gone too. It's like, it brings all those feelings out for sure. With the poster, it's more of the sadness of, this is perfect. Like, he would love this, and I can't show him this.
So with those two incidents, do you, if you just sat now reflecting back, how much energy do you think your body wanted you to expend regarding feeling the feelings?
Interesting. I feel like with the poster, I'm just making this up sort of on the spot, but I feel more connected to the feelings because it feels okay for me to feel sad that something he would have liked is something that I feel sad that I can't get for him. With the restaurant
you're remembering all the positive times where you shared.
So I feel like in those moments, I've let myself feel that a little easier. And the restaurant experiences have been, I would characterize them as not good. Like, I don't feel good. And so maybe that is one of those cases where my body is like, hey, you should feel. And then part of me is going like, I don't want to. Like, I could feel that tension for sure. Because it's reminding me of the reality of the situation.
Did you feel this last weekend when we went out and saw a movie?
Every time I've been having a drink, yes. Including that time, yes. And actually, oh my gosh, that time even more so. Because anytime we go to a movie, especially a movie he would have enjoyed watching, right? Central Cinema has got a lot of connections. Right. And then just the fact that we're getting together as friends, like all these connections come up. So that now there's also like guilt, like, obviously I know it's not my fault that he can't be with us, but I feel guilt that he's not, Right. And that also that connection of like, oh my gosh, he's really not here. And, oh, I'm drinking. Maybe I shouldn't be drinking. Like, all those things absolutely come up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I debated whether I wanted to talk with you, but now that we're talking about it, I have no idea if this is accurate or not, but I felt a pall on you, especially later that night. I hate it when people are like, you seem different today, and I do a fair amount of investigation, and I'm just like, no, I think that's you. So I don't want to impose that. And there was nothing wrong with our hangout
No, that's possible. Well,
you felt different, not in a bad way, but just so. Is that something?
Especially towards the end, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's two things that might have been going on. One, I am pretty sure you're right about that connection. And then the second one, which is not unconnected, is the more I thought about the fact that it was the 30-year anniversary of that movie, the more I also was like, oh man, that was a long time ago. And I think they're both connected, right? Because I knew this person for more than 30 years and now I don't. they're gone.
Yeah.
And I'm getting older. And so like there is a lot there. So it is possible by the end I was feeling some blue from that.
Okay. By the way, it was Hackers, the movie.
Yeah.
And it was Heckle Vision, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. Anyway.
It was a lot of fun though. I did have a great time.
So just using that as an example, and then we'll get back to what we were talking about. When you first started to notice those feelings coming up, what would that have looked like if you could wave a magic wand?
Okay, like the better version of it?
Mm-hmm. And also know that I and everyone else involved would have been totally cool with whatever you wanted to do. What would that look like?
Okay, well, something I have done in a couple other instances is explicitly remember Ron. Like there's been a couple other moments. In fact, one at the Central. What was the movie? Shoot. I went and saw another movie at the Central.
Was it Princess Bride that we saw?
No. It was after that. Because it was after that. But anyways, I explicitly was like, well, Ron would have really loved this. And I kind of called that out and whoever I was with made a toast. The people I was with. Okay. And we made a toast about it. I'm not saying that solves everything, but I feel like
it's better than
calling it out directly. I felt better about it, and it was like...
But last weekend, was that all that you would have needed?
No, I think that's one. So that's one example. Another thing is, honestly, and maybe it didn't have to be in that moment, but like if you hadn't brought this topic up, I probably wouldn't have told you how I felt, that I have those feelings, but why not? Like, why shouldn't I be able to talk to a friend, especially, you and stuff about... So I guess, I don't know if it's in the moment, but I think bringing these feelings up, especially for me, like when I verbalize things, I think better.
Yeah.
So yeah.
One barrier that could be internally imposed and maybe even somewhat externally from me possibly is, come on, Berto, we're just trying to have a good time tonight. Don't bring us down.
Sure.
I wouldn't consciously think that.
Yeah.
But I can't deny that it wouldn't be the first thing I would want to do that night, But I don't know. When I think about it out loud now, and maybe this is also part of it, is, what, I don't know, although it would be a little bit more, I don't know, emotionally investing, it would be more meaningful and, I don't know. I don't know what word to put to it.
Like, in either case, the common element is all of it was going on inside my head, and I was not externalizing it.
Right.
I mean, you noticed, but I wasn't trying to externalize.
But that's a classic. It's just a classic example. So you're 50 and have explicitly gone to therapy and talked with me and I'm a therapist.
Right.
You could have talked about it. Right. Your body wanted to do that, and yet you didn't because of this notion of don't bring people down. Yeah.
And the other part that's been coming up for me recently regarding that, regarding Ron and grief is, so it's his birthday on the 17th. It's coming right up. Now, one thing that's odd is there was never a ceremony for after his death. There was a very small, just the family, we went and saw him. There was a brief wake, okay? There was never any ceremony, any celebration of life, nothing like that. I think part of it is how suddenly he departed, the circumstances. But many of us friends got together and we're like, oh, we should do something. And we haven't. So part of me feels guilt. Like, I'm like, oh, I should organize something. Then part of me goes like, well, who is this for? Because he won't enjoy it. Is it for me? But like, am I going to get myself overcommitted and invite a whole bunch of people I barely ever see anymore? And am I going to spend a whole bunch of money trying to prove how much I loved Ron? Like, so I'm being cautious about those things, right? Especially given my background with things like that. But at the same time, I'm like, but I should do something. So all those things come up as well.
Okay. I'm glad you're bringing this up for the listeners and also for yourself, that ritual ceremony we didn't invent in the last 100 years.
Right.
There's a chance that this exact impulse is what defined us from the rest of the animal kingdom. The burials of early not the various different species of humans,
I mean, we have pyramids.
Well, but even going farther back,
Yeah.
I can't remember the details, but Neanderthals, I think there's evidence, don't quote me on this, that they might, it's hard to know, but there's a chance that there's evidence that there's burials and ritual and burying them with flowers or with their things, or, who knows, don't quote me on this. But anyway, point is that it's in our bones in a lot of ways, and obviously a huge part of grieving. And yeah, it's interesting that you're thinking, well, he's not around, so it's not going to benefit him. But that is not the point, particularly of this kind of ritual or ceremony. It's for everyone else. And other cultures, besides mainstream American culture, understand this much better. For us, it's about, well, what's the practicality of that? But it's incredibly important, pouring one out for your homies, that kind of thing. Having a spot, planting a tree, scattering of the ashes, reading a poem.
Maybe this is what I'm not saying this is everything, but maybe this is one gap, is that I have been putting this off for multiple reasons. One was pain. The second one was I was sort of like waiting for the family to do something, right? But I was like, but I don't want to step on anyone's toes. But that was quickly, it became clear, like, I don't think that's happening, right? I also was, in my mind, like I said, I don't want this to get out of control. I don't want to invite 600 people that I don't know, right? But I think I've also gone too far the other way, which is like, I'll just do nothing. And that ends up not feeling good. And I don't end up processing myself. And I don't, so yeah, now as I'm talking about it, I'm like, I want to do something. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It just have to be close friends.
And your body wants to do something.
Yeah, right.
It's not just like a choice like I like red shoes. This is something that you need.
Yeah.
And it could look like 5 people. It could look like yourself. You could just do it on your own. It could involve 600 people. But yeah, the key is not to allow all these bullshit notions into the process of trying to impress people or not hurt someone's feelings.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some wiggle room there. It's just like, well, I couldn't possibly invite those 5 people and not invite that 6th person, and so I guess it won't ruin the time. But also maybe not. You know what I mean? So all that is important because your body needs this. And there are other ways to do it, maybe, like I said, by yourself. But without it, you could suffer. Yeah. You could have problems later on. Yeah. Or at the very least, an annoying, nagging feeling of lack of closure for the next, for the rest of your life. So there's that. But getting back to your loss of your mom. So you had the apple, and that wanting to sit in front of the TV and eat at the age of 25, 35, 45 is your body's oscillating back to grieving in all likelihood. Now, maybe that's all that your body needed, was to sit in front of the TV and eat. Maybe that's all the feeling of the feelings you needed, but maybe it was actually...
I don't think,
Yeah.
I think it was... it's impossible to know, of course, exactly how much everything's connected, but it seemed to myself and my therapist too big of a coincidence that inside, because what was really happening inside during those periods of time is I had all that unhappiness, not only from my mom, but like a whole bunch of other stuff, but definitely from my mom. So I have all this unhappiness and all these bad feelings and this trauma. And what's pacifying me, almost literally a pacifier, right, in my mouth, is food and TV. Now, that's not that unusual. People say this all the time. I eat my feelings, whatever. But it's just, in my case, it was almost like this perfect storm combination of like, and without knowing, I remember this feeling, and this is the only thing. And if I can stay here forever, maybe my mom will come back, right? Like subconsciously, maybe. And so it was a very powerful and unfortunately not great combination, because I would end up staying up late. The TV would actually depress me because it was usually watching news and being scared of the world. And the food was not helping me be eating right and all these things.
Yeah. And who knows, but it's possible that if you had known about this, in your 20s, you could have at least asked the question is there something else emotionally that my body wants to do besides this, or in addition to this?
Call me. Just coming to mind right now, mind blowing, I know. But I could have called my mom. I just never thought of that, right? Never in my wildest dreams. And all those times at 9 p.m., 10 p.m., maybe it gets too late, but the next morning or at least at 9 or whatever, be like, I'm going to call my mother because I'm now aware, because I did the therapy, I did whatever, and I'm aware that what I'm needing is connection with my loved one, especially my mom. Who knows? But that's something that I never tried.
Yeah. Right. So in terms of framing it in therapy lingo, there's this aspect of it that is independent of grief, right? It's just a longing for connection and attachment.
Yeah.
But you can also grieve by doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
It might sound strange because you haven't really lost your mom and you're trying to reconnect with her. You're gaining her if you call her, for example. But it absolutely can be a part of grief. Another way to frame it is that, let's say that metaphorically, your mom, for you as an infant or as a toddler, as a young person, died, and you got a new mom. We could maybe say all of us, have this, even though my mom didn't abandon me. There was maybe a slow transition between the mom that I had 0 to 1 versus 1 to 3 versus 3 to 6 versus,
and eventually you move out of the house and all these things.
So there's a version of mom that you will never get back, a version of that relationship. And even though you're going back to your mom at the age of 25 to talk to her, you're still grieving something that is gone. But anyway, so the apple, that's interesting. We already talked about hallucinating that you saw her. The other thing to think about is, and this is a dubious connection, but I wonder what you think, is the vulnerability to your babysitter. Now, you could have been sexually abused by her regardless of being abandoned by your mom, right? Mm. But it's possible that unprocessed grief drove you not only to, I'm not blaming the victim, but to solicit attention from her, to be extra nice to her or something, and also to not signal that something was wrong or to want it even more as a gaslit victim, that kind of thing.
It's possible that I didn't bring it up. Well, who knows? I mean, I was 5, whatever. And she did it to both me and the other kid. But at the same time, I definitely needed female attention, right? I was living by myself with my dad in New York at the time. So he had a girlfriend here and there, but I have no mother. I have no aunt at that time. I have no grandmas. So female attention probably would have been extremely important to me. Yeah. So would have made me less likely to recoil or run and tell my dad, or who knows, maybe.
Yeah, it's kind of a stretch, but I just thought I'd mention.
At the very least, it did put me already in a wounded spot, right? I was already struggling with those open wounds and
compounded it.
Yeah.
Another area that I know of is that by the time your mom did start to have more contact with you, a good portion of it, by the time you're in Colombia, involved giving you gifts, showing up with American wealth and materialism and stuff, and American culture maybe as well. And you also struggled with spending addiction later in life. And so I don't know if we've explicitly connected those things. I feel like we have, but so the idea here is that if you were allowed to grieve, or if those impulses were prompts to grieve properly throughout your life, then it's possible that those symptoms would have been 10% because there's nothing, the loss was there, there's going to be an effect. At the age of 35, there's going to be some weirdness. There's going to be some quote unquote problems. But they will be massively intensified when we don't notice or allow ourselves or have a system around us to help us grieve. So what do you think about all that?
Well, because if we consider that it's not just me in this hypothetical, it's not just me going to therapy as a little kid. My mom is also going to therapy and therefore getting help and advice, right? Because what was happening is, since she had an attachment disorder, attachment problems, she didn't know
From her own child.
from her own childhood, she didn't know how to attach to me, but felt guilt and responsibility. And her way of doing that in a pragmatic, non-connected way was, oh, well, I'll send money, I'll pay for his school, I'll buy his pants, I'll buy his t-shirts, and I'll send him cool stuff. He can't get these things there. It's great. And me as a kid, of course, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Look at these cool new tennis shoes and pumps. I can pump my shoes and cool t-shirts, and I got a Swatch. Oh, now I don't feel as left out at school because all those kids have money and my dad's unemployed, but now I've got the cool clothes too.
Well, and
right?
my mom is showing some effort, some acknowledgement, some love, right? It's not completely devoid of warmth.
And then I think what the short circuiting that happens is, oh, okay, I get it. So if I want to show someone that I love them, I pay for stuff. That's what I do. So unfortunately, like, I had this combo of, in my household, my dad's finances are crumbled. I'm now the lesson I'm learning is, if anyone around me has money, or if I have any money, I need to spend it immediately. I can't have money. But if I do have money and I want to show someone that I love them, I need to spend it immediately all on them, right? And so, I developed some very weird notions about money that definitely hurt me years later. But I think in this other alternate reality, what would have happened is, maybe my mom was still supporting me and buying me things. By the way, maybe because my dad would have also gone to therapy, maybe he would have been more functional as well, right? But at the very least, if we just stick with my mom, she might have been actually spending more time calling me, writing me, talking to me.
Yeah.
Right?
This is another aspect of grief that's very important, which is that when we really flesh out healthy grieving, it always involves attachments and love and warmth and connection and closer relationships, which are good in and of themselves, but are the cure for the problem. The problem was separation. When we are separated, we experience grief. And whether it's reconnecting in a different way with your mom, or continuing that connection, or connecting with an aunt or someone else, some other, or enriching the attachment with your dad or something. This is all part of it. Grief isn't just, okay, I'm going to feel my feelings by myself and everything will be okay, right? So interesting. All right. Another thing that we've talked about, at least to some extent, is, your mom ended up having another kid, your brother.
Right.
And he grew up in the States and had your mom his whole life. You're for, I don't know, maybe 10 years or something, knowing full well that your brother gets your mom, not only just your mom, but also gets to live in the States and have all the nice things and live in the nice house and not have the chaos of a dad that's unemployed and yelling at the television all day and grandparents that are declining. He has it all. And there has and is, now it's a playful rivalry, but there's always been a rivalry there, right?
Right.
So if the idea is that if you were allowed to grieve, independent of your brother, he doesn't have to be involved. He could have been, obviously, but that in all likelihood, any sort of complication with your relationship with him would have been drastically reduced. But in relation to the unmet grief, unmet needs in this way, how might that have fueled extra rivalry or feelings with your brother or behaviors towards him?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What's interesting, so my brother and I have talked about this a lot in the last few years. And in fact, I wrote a song. I don't know if I told you this story. So I wrote this song called High on a Hill. And it's one of the ones that I just finished recording recently. So I'll send you the link. The song is called High on a Hill because Bogota is 8,000 feet up. And the song talks about, my mom leaving and me being high on a hill away from her, right? And I had basically the whole song written but the whole theme of the song was like about loss. Like, and the chorus talks about, I am a lonely ghost of a child. That's one of the lines in the chorus. And I was telling my brother about it, and we were talking about it and stuff. And it's really interesting because, see, yes, he lived with her, right? But my mom still had the same wounds. And so his experience is oddly similar to mine. First of all, he was also an only child up here, and I'm an only child down there. My mom, as much as, she loves us, but in her way, she wasn't the cuddly, touchy-feely mom. And that made my brother feel also like there was a barrier there. And we both didn't have each other for most of our life. And he also, just like the jealousy part, so I'm jealous about the things you described. And then he sees me in Colombia surrounded by my family and my grandparents and all these fun houses and food and things. So we both had like these feelings of like, what the hell is going on? We obviously never talked about this growing up. We didn't even think, consciously, it was all there inside our heads. But whenever I visited him, I'm sure these things would bubble up without us knowing, because it would always start lovely and then we'd have these big blowout fights. Now, that's not unusual siblings fight, but I'm sure that there was like some of this was stuff that was bubbling up.
Yeah.
As we grew up, nowadays, look, we're as close as we've ever been. But
yeah. And when you were younger, you were a lot older than him.
Yeah, 4 years. Yeah.
Were
almost 4 years.
More capable, smarter, and would come down on him a lot.
And then he would feel a sense of inferiority, which was totally unfair. He's like 4 years younger than me.
Yeah. So the idea is, and so this is really great too, because you're telling a story about grieving. Through all your therapy and awareness, you're allowing yourself to feel the feelings, which came out, the decision when you were writing this song to write it about this was felt by you, and you went with it, which is another part of grieving, which has to do with meaning making and creativity and feeling the feelings. And so you are allowing yourself to do that. So you do that. And then another element to this is you share it with your brother. And another element is you actually identify this is about mom, and then your brother and you don't shut it down. You both allow all of these little micro decisions and behaviors are listening to your oscillation and your need, and through that you're writing a new narrative. This is another part of grieving, is that we will start with a narrative or a lack of narrative in some instances, and then we enter the liminal space of the exploration, and this new narrative, this new meaning like pops out.
In fact, literally, because then I rewrote the final chorus. It's now, we are two lonely ghosts of a child, and he's going to sing it with me. Because, it's kind of like this beautiful realization of like, hey, we both had our own little universes. And even though one of us was living with my mom, one of us wasn't, we were both experiencing two poles of the same thing, two sides of the same coin.
Right. So 47 years later, your body is having a new iteration of grief, and you listen to it, and it spans, months of time, right? This particular mode or version of it. And at the beginning of the process, I'm sure you wouldn't answer it this way, but to the average person, you might say like, well, what benefit are you going to get from this? And there is a benefit, obviously, and you're mentioning it, but it's a new narrative. There's a different feeling. It's hard, as I write the book and I write about my own grief resolutions or benefits or something, I always find myself in the book saying, it's thinking, but sometimes saying, I don't know how to put this into words. All I know is that it's good.
Yeah.
And the feeling that you get, right? There's ways of narrativizing it, of saying that there's a new meaning, or you have a connection through grief. You are bonding with your brother. The rival is now your brother. You've felt the feelings. You've expressed things. You can imagine, because I visualize what this little music video would look like. It's an animated
kind of limbo style. And at the beginning, you see the one little ghost in one thing, and over there they see the colorful, beautiful. But towards the end of the song, you see that there's two little towers, but they're connected by this like love, right? So it's like you reframe the same thing. Nothing changes the past, but you reframe it, and it for both of us, it gave us this feeling of connection. Like, oh,
yeah.
You know,
and every time you sing the song, also the recording, it's there. It's this concrete thing that represents this, that is a totem of those moments, and can be revisited by both you and your brother, and now us, I suppose, by the time we hear this music. And so the idea is that if you were given some version of this when you were younger, you know, let's say when you came up to the States when you're 15, if I was, you know,
the ghost therapist,
if I was the Bruce Willis and was able to, maybe only I can talk to you, and I say, you know, you start picking on your brother,
right?
And later that day, I'm just like, hey, tell me about it, and you're like, well, blah blah, and then I start to say, well, you know, you've always had a thing to some extent against your brother because he always had your mom, you know. And say you're open to that, and so you start talking about it,
right? And
then now, from my perspective, I don't know your brother. I don't know. Maybe your brother would be like, "Yeah, I get your mom, and fuck you," but it's quite possible. But through grief, you know, things happen, right?
Right.
And you, by acknowledging it and naming it yourself, that might have gravitationally pulled you towards at least some conversation with your brother. You know, you weren't writing music yet by that point. Maybe there was some other thing that you would have done. Maybe a Tandy computer program that
actually maybe
and you it sparks a conversation with your brother in your.
Oh wait, at 15, that's when I started writing music.
Okay,
maybe my first song would have been about this instead of.
But when we step into it and we acknowledge it even halfway, it allows that mode, that oscillation to occur of feeling the feelings, and things just fucking happen. You know what I mean? Like when you were driving around with this feeling of searching for Ron, like you allowed yourself, the body knows. And so it's at 15, you and your brother was grieving a loss too, even though he had mom. He had been losing her the whole time, or had given up on really having that deeper thing. Maybe it was unnamed to him at that point. Let's say that he barely understood that at the time. But there would be at some point, let's say by the time you're 16, you have some 16-year-old version of what you're experiencing today. It probably wouldn't be as sophisticated or mature, but there'd be some feeling of like, oh, you know, my brother also didn't really get what he wanted either. And It's weird that through grieving and through talking about that, by acknowledging a shitty thing for you and your brother, why would you feel good afterwards? You know, good is a weird word that I'm applying, but because words fail us in describing the helpfulness or the transformation or the benefit or something. So if you were young and you, if we didn't have all the bullshit of toxic masculinity or ignoring child loss or the implications of talking about such a thing in the household of your mom, like what would this happen? Would this result in a blowout with my mom that we'd end up fighting and I'd never talk to her again? What if my brother makes fun of me or tells on me? You know, just if we get rid of all that fucking bullshit, it's interesting to think about what could have happened all the way back then.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So in closing, let's talk about one more. So, because I wrote down a lot of other things like, you know, drinking, attacking the tree.
Oh my gosh, yes,
attacking the homeless guy.
Although the homeless, well, who knows? But the homeless guy, I felt I was attacking my dad.
Okay.
But the tree was the first time in my life as an adult, because as a child I destroyed things that for sure were. Because did you include the broken Lego house?
Oh, I forgot about that.
It wasn't Legos. It was like Legos. But just as a quick aside, I was little, like maybe 4 or something. And I'm living with my grandma in Colombia. So at this point, I have no dad, no mom, no aunt. Now that I'm just there with my grandma. So I think I'm 4. I go to the daycare, preschool, whatever it's called. And before I go, my grandma and I were building this little house out of the equivalent of Legos. It's just kind of a different thing, but building it. But we hadn't finished it. I go to school. I come back. My grandma's finished it. It looks lovely. I fly into a rage because I feel left out. I'm like, and I just start kicking it and destroying it, and I broke most of the pieces. And my grandma was in tears, trying to calm me down, and she didn't know what to do.
And it's a house, which is an interesting metaphor.
Yes, and of course, my narrative for years was, oh, I feel so sad for my poor grandma, but I hadn't felt the sadness for myself. Oh yeah, of course, I had this hypersensitivity to being left out. Why would that be? And it wasn't just I remember experiencing this all the time. I would wake up from a nap, because as a kid you take these naps during the day. You still take naps, but and I'd wake up and I'd hear voices, jovial voices downstairs in the kitchen, and I'd run downstairs. What is happening? Why am I being left out of this fun? Why would I feel that, right? Obviously I must have been, like you said, my body must have been like, hey, you need to feel feelings because you were left out, right? So yeah, it all can, and like you said, the symbolism of it's a house, and I didn't get to build the house, so now I will destroy it, burn it to the ground. Mm-hmm. If I can't be part of this, no one can, right?
Yeah, and anger is a part of grieving often.
Yeah, and so then you fast forward all these years later, I am in my 30s, I guess.
Early 30s.
Yeah, early 30s. And I've had too much to drink, and all of a sudden, something, I don't remember all the circumstances, but it triggers all the feels about my mom. And I go into a fit of rage, and I'm screaming and crying. And I find this tree, and I just start tearing it apart. This small tree, I'm not King Kong, but a poor tree did nothing wrong, and I just destroyed it.
Yeah. Yeah, alcohol both numbs and it numbs, but it also numbs our barriers sometimes, such that we can feel the feelings finally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so fast forwarding through various other things that I thought about the time you went through with your wife where there was almost divorce. Yeah. That could be tied potentially to this. There's let's see. So what I wanted to close with, because it's the most obvious grieving period, was when you were going through fighting with your mom, which in my head was 15.
Yeah, 15 through 18, right? The years of high school.
No. I'm thinking 15 years ago.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So
not the high school fights.
The long-standing grief that had yet to be, in a big way, really expressed.
Sure.
And because in my head, we were talking about it in your old house.
Yeah.
And that would have been 17 years ago or something. Anyway.
Yeah.
So one could say that after going through a lot of therapy, and maybe after going through and reconciling with your wife at the time, and maybe with the extra space of being self-employed at the time, you could kind of
think,
have the freedom to think. Yeah. And maybe just maturity or whatever. And you're finally ready to feel the feelings, which involved the sadness, the despair, the anger, the disappointment, the reality of the loss.
Right.
The abandonment. And you could no longer suppress it when you were around your mom. So tell me about how that emerged.
Yeah, it was the kind of thing where I just started having a very short fuse with her and drawing lines. No, I'm not doing that. And then it escalated. One of the things that exacerbated it is that, as you will recall, also right around the same time, I had done the thing where I had lent money to a relative and they didn't pay me back. It was a lot of money, right? Well, my mom was trying to help. She was. and she was telling me what I need to do and when I should do it and how I should do it, you know.
It was her brother?
I don't want to say.
Oh,
but,
okay.
Yeah. Okay. And we were fighting. Or we weren't fighting. It didn't start as a fight. It started as like her trying to help me figure out what to do. And then her and her friend were both talking to me. But it started getting to a point where I felt like they were giving me orders and commands. And then that, you know, in Inside Out, you know, the red dude puts his fist down and his fire comes. It happened. And in that moment, I just yelled at them and I said, no, I'm going to do things I'm paraphrasing. I'm going to do things my way. Basically, like, you know, I'm taking control. And I went out and I slammed her front door, because I left the house. I slammed it so hard that it broke. And I wandered off by myself for like an hour or something like that. That was like the volcano bubbling over, you know? And it was weird, right? Because on the surface, it wasn't, you left me, I'm angry, right? On the surface, it was like, you're trying to help me, and I'm drawing the line here.
And this is the same house that you came to live in when you were 15.
So yeah, absolutely. And
the same door you approached at 15 to enter that.
Same door.
The same door she opened up when she eventually would land in Tacoma and leave you. You know, it's a
lot of symbolism.
Yeah. Maybe if you were a giant, you would tear down the house.
Yeah. So actually, that was kind of and luckily it never got worse than that, but that was the biggest manifestation of it, which in the moment I didn't realize quite what was happening. You know, I just knew I was so angry. And I was stone sober in this moment. You know, there's no drinking involved. It was just me bubbling over with a rage. Oh. And, you know, after that, there was obviously, she actually handled it much better than one might have thought, because, you know, by this point, she actually had gone through some therapy. And maybe she, I don't know if she knew, like if deep down she knew, maybe that's why I was upset. I don't know. But she didn't fly off the handle at me.
This is also during the housing bubble and that kind of stress, right? Could have been?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, all the collapse of all that stuff.
So that can't have helped. But
right. But she welcomed me back. We made peace and we had good conversations. We didn't, unfortunately, connect the dots explicitly. We didn't go like, oh, you know what? I bet you I was also really furious about you leaving me.
So is that the entirety of...
No, because so we actually had... One time we went to tea, and she specifically wanted to have a conversation about leaving. And
soon after this event, right?
I think this was before.
Okay, around that time.
Yeah, and then...
Well, that'd be interesting if it was before, because it's like she
I think
prompted...
so.
Okay.
Because this was her having gone through therapy, and unfortunately, from my perspective, the therapist told her whatever, and I think she interpreted sort of robotically what she should have done, which meant, oh, I need to talk to my son about this. But in practice, the way it felt to me was that she was getting something off her chest to check off a box and move on to the next challenge. I didn't feel resolution at all, and I didn't feel...
Yeah.
Like she came back.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like if I could have orchestrated differently, I would have done many things different. So that was unfortunately probably, she meant it as a moment of us talking about it, but I think that made it worse for me.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm just interpreting this right now, but another angle to this is that for whatever reason, your mom decided to bring it up, and she did. And it's not surprising that, given her track record and her attachment issues, that she didn't suddenly grow a different attachment system and fully comprehend or communicate in a warm and attuned manner, you know?
Yeah.
But it was something.
Yeah,
right?
and it was.
So she broaches the topic.
Yep.
You have now been pushed oscillation wise into grieving. And one thing leads to, there's probably a lot of things that go along during that time, but it culminates eventually in you slamming the door and breaking it, And,
but we had many other arguments too leading up to that.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Like in my head, my narrative was like you went through a period of a lot of arguments.
Yeah. I was having a lot of arguments with her. Yes.
About like what?
About what the surface topic was about money and the fact that I had left my job and all these. There was a lot of things that if you were just an alien looking from the outside in, it's like, oh, I get what they're talking about. But really, I think we were trying to come to terms with what had happened, looking back now.
And the gist would, from the outside, would be she's thinking you're doing it wrong and you're defending yourself.
Yeah, or she's giving me advice and I don't want the advice, or stuff like that. Which I had seen her, I had seen her go through that with my brother, and I was resentful because I'm like, listen, I know what I'm doing. Now, granted, I actually was making terrible mistakes. I was screwing up, but
not really.
I just had, I just felt
not on the scale of terrible mistakes.
Sure, but I just felt I was like being impinged upon, and so I used it as an excuse without knowing to start letting my anger show and start drawing lines and start,
Yeah,
and then like I said, it bubbled up to a breaking point.
Right, like a 3-year-old saying,
"Yeah,
fuck you, mom. Why did you leave?"
Yeah.
And one could stretch it a bit and say like, oh, now you're concerned with my well-being. Now you're going to guide me what to do. You weren't fucking there.
Yeah.
And I don't even like the advice. And I've done fine on my own. Thank you very much. And I had to because of fucking you.
Right.
So stop giving me fucking advice.
Yeah,
I'm inserting words.
I know, totally. I think that was what was happening under the hood. And then above the hood is like, oh, I'm annoyed because you're giving me advice. I don't want it, But it was, we had I remember it was.
So there's two things. One,
heated.
If you hadn't allowed yourself to feel the feelings in the moment, you would have suppressed it or vented on a tree or something. And it's also interesting symbolically that your mom lives in a forest, kind of.
That's true.
And you grew up not in the forest in Bogota.
Yeah.
But anyway, I feel another song being written in this moment. The tree and anyway, so
I mentioned the forest. Riding through the forest is in it's in the B section of the High on a Hill.
You talk
song.
About destroying a tree in the book. I
don't destroy the tree in the song.
But the way of looking at it from this angle is that your body, through all the therapy and whatnot, and to your mom's credit of broaching the topic, you were allowing yourself to grieve in a way that wasn't fully conscious, but that you were somewhat conscious of. I mean, I remember talking with you about it at the time, and you were saying that the fighting had to do with her abandoning you, although it wasn't explicitly about that. You're just like, I just... And you were, even like a week after one of the fights, I remember talking with you. You were pretty heated about it.
Yeah, and what happened is that it started getting to the point that I couldn't see her or hear her voice without being in the moment and thinking about it.
Yeah, you had, from my memory, cut her off and said, "I can't talk to you anymore. Like I'm not going to see you."
I don't know if I told her that, but I think I felt that.
You were at the very least thinking about never talking to her again, never seeing her again.
Yeah,
drawing a boundary, and so that's your body was needing this, had needed this for up until that point, 40 years or something, but also, or 30 years, but also you allowed yourself to do it because you had been listening to yourself. Because, if you rewind the clock 10 years, 20 years, you could absolutely imagine yourself sublimating some way by drinking or chaos or yelling at your wife or, you were facing it head on. And another way of looking at it is all of that anger and all that injustice and all that pain had not been able to be expressed over the years toward your mom, or at least explicitly in your head towards your mom. That should have been expressed when you were 3, when you were 3.5 when you were 4, when you were 4.5, when you were 5. All of that anger was there, and there was compounding issues as well. But even if we just go with the original abandonment, that anger, that need, the body, anger is feeling the feelings. So when we think about grief and feeling the feelings, it's not just sadness and despair and yearning. It's also fucking anger often. And you had been not allowed. No one was allowing you. The Lego house was another moment where and that's the problem with complicated grief, is that when we suppress it, when it finally does come out, it explodes.
Yeah.
And especially if we don't have a framework around it, we will shame ourselves. You were saying earlier that with the Lego house, for decades, you framed it as shame for yourself of like, oh, I can't believe what I did to my grandma. I mean, what a jerk I was, or what a weirdo I was, or what immaturity, and you're 4, having been abandoned by your mom, your dad, and your aunt at this point. So it's like, I think a little bit of anger on a stupid ass Lego house is okay. I mean, you have kids. You've had 2 4-year-olds. You know, even when they're raised well, they act all sorts of ways when they're 4, and that's just normal. So to look back and say like, what's wrong with me? Not only is that like emotional suppression and shame, but it's also grief shame, right? Yeah. Of course you were angry. So eventually, through this process, you're 17 years ago, allowing yourself to finally feel these feelings. Your body needed it. And one way of also looking at it is like you kind of went into a period of time for months where you were allowing yourself to finally enter at least one style of feeling the feelings, Right. Like you could kind of frame it that way.
And because part of it was that when we had that conversation at tea, a lot of the conversation, at least as I felt it, was she was trying to explain why she did it, why she felt she needed to leave, why she felt in danger, all these things. And from my perspective, I was like, I don't care. It just like, I was like, I don't care. Like now, if I could wave a magic wand and be the ghost therapist in the moment and give advice to both of us, but I'd be like, I know you feel like you need to justify yourself, but actually that's not what he needs, right? He needs to like feel your love, right? And that I think was the biggest thing, is that was a moment where what I wanted was like maybe even crying together and like just like, I'm so sorry, like the sorry part, because that was what I needed.
Have you ever gotten that?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
And part of me, after I had kids, a couple things happened. First, it reinforced my lack of understanding about how her brain works, because I saw my kids at those ages and I was like, there is no force on earth. If I were being abused, I would take them with me. Like,
so that was an explicit thought.
That was, absolutely.
Yeah. So that is another element of grieving. We don't think of those things as grieving, I think, typically, because when we think of grieving, we think wearing black and crying at a funeral or something, but it's absolutely a part of grief. Raising kids, there's a lot of random thoughts that could pop into your head. This one is particular, and
that's right.
We could frame it a number of ways, but grieving is the way that I would frame it in this sense, in that your body was revisiting and feeling that dissonance of just like from the other side looking at, and that was also in my notes of your early experiences as a father,
right,
and how explicitly the contrast and all the various different manifestations, overly worrying about your kids or something,
Sure,
could be another manifestation. And also, the last thing on my notes is speaking up for yourself regarding your thyroid could also be potentially connected to grieving of, and not just like a manifestation of abandonment, but your body wanting to there's various different aspects of the grieving, the feelings,
Like,
right?
hey, fuckers, listen, there's a thing.
Yeah. There's some closure there,
Yeah.
There's some moving that grief ball down the road.
Well, I'll tell you the other thing that happened. I definitely don't think I had told you this, but the other thing that I've come to realize in the last few years, because of the whole parent connection too, I think I've mentioned to you how when I think of my abuser when I was 5, I mostly feel, I feel sad because I feel like she must have been abused too. But I had never gotten to that point with my mom until sort of recently, where I was like, I kind of had this realization of, that feeling I had when my kids were like that age, 2 and 3, that feeling I had, her chemistry in her brain didn't produce that feeling. And it made me sad for her. Obviously it sucked for me, but I was also like, that sucks that and then something that did happen is as she became a grandma, I saw shades of that starting to show up for her, because she, and my brother and I have talked about this, she has been a lot more like that with my kids. And I don't know if it's just age or whatever, but but I did feel that sense of like, oh man, she missed out on that. And of course, it freaking affected me, but it was interesting. So I had those two sides of the coin.
Right. You would think that with that realization, it would just be a bad feeling. The recognition of, once again, I'm now reminded of what I didn't get. And what a profound thing that you didn't get. Not only that she abandons, but even before she abandoned you, you weren't getting it, right? So why would acknowledging and remembering and dwelling, as one would say, on such a profoundly depressing, despairing memory result in something, again, without a better word, something that's good? It's a weird thing. Why would that make one feel good or better or transformed or helped or moving forward or resolved or I don't know what word to put to it, but it's a very, very strange thing. And it's so counter to our toxic positivity in Americanism, It's just bizarre. And it doesn't make any logical sense, at least in the framework of American philosophy that I've internalized. It's not logical that revisiting something that would cause despair would ultimately feel good or meaningful or helpful or something, It's weird.
Yeah.
But to see that from the other side, now to have empathy for your mom of just but it rewrites the story to some extent, right? And so that's how these griefs work. Even if things went really well, if I was there in the sixth sense for you from age 3 to 6 or something, and everyone, including your mom, did everything they could within reason to help you. You still would have, upon having your own kids turn 3.5, you would have had grief. You would have had feelings. There would have been another discovery, another emergence, a revisiting, and that would have happened. But throughout your life, there would have been fewer broken trees and blackout drunk moments and a wake of hurt feelings for yourself and others, your brother, your wife, others, to a much lesser extent. And you would have a more resolved feeling about it. It would just be less intense. Or another way to put it is that you would have explicit intensity when you were younger, such that you wouldn't need to have explicit intensity when you're older. You know, like the broken tree, if you had had another 10 broken Lego houses when you were 4, you wouldn't have had to break the tree when you were 33.
And it's all compound interest, because like if my dad had had similar grieving mechanisms and tools and techniques applied to him, if my mom had, if, you know, everyone around my family had, for all the other problems and both socioeconomic, everything, the whole system gets better and it helps everyone within the system. right? So a lot of the things, it's so interesting because I was just watching this video about comparing, the way Disney treats an evil character versus the way Miyazaki movies treat an evil character. And they both have their pros and cons. But the interesting thing about most of the Studio Ghibli movies, is it Ghibli or Ghibli?
Ghibli, I've heard Ghibli and Ghibli. I've heard both.
Okay. Is that they are very nuanced when it comes to what's evil or what's bad, right? Like the quote bad guy of Princess Mononoke is is the lady, but she takes care of the infirm and she's like pro women's rights and she's like a leader, but she also wants to kind of take the nature by its horns. So it's very nuanced. And then you have moments of forgiveness and you have moments of overcoming things, and it's a lot less straightforward. And that in a way is really what we experience in life, because my mom, I could have framed it as like, she was just evil. She left me. She's evil. And that's the end of the story. I need to grieve my evil mom who left me, right? But then when you step back, it's like, oh, wait, actually, she was also grieving and she never got to grieve. And that's why she didn't allow me to grieve. And my dad was grieving and he didn't allow, like everyone's grieving. No one knows how to grieve.
Yeah.
Everyone's suffering.
Well, yeah. Now you're seeing what I've been seeing as I write the book. So in closing, how do you feel about sharing all this?
I've never regretted talking about my experiences on the podcast. It always gives me new windows and new.
How's your body feeling right now?
It's actually better than I expected.
Okay.
Like the last time I didn't feel well was I think it was during the Menendez brothers with some of the trauma conversations. That one definitely affected me quite a bit. I got very stressed.
Yeah.
This one I feel okay. I definitely feel, I feel it, but it's not as bad as I was thinking. I was kind of prepping myself like but it's okay. And I think part of it is that this one I have attacked a lot, And anyways, but I found this conversation really interesting because like even in this conversation, I again look and I see things from even more perspectives. So
right.
That's
and
always really,
this conversation is another part of feeling the feelings.
That's right.
Even though, there's no explicit behavioral emotion. It's even just intellectually revisiting something is processing, so to speak. And there's undoubtedly emotions involved in that, you know what I mean?
That's right.
But I want to thank you from me, but also from the listeners for doing this, because it's a rich example and it wouldn't be even close to being as rich if you didn't hand yourself over spontaneously and willingly.
Yeah. And I want to thank, I still want to thank my mom and my dad, because in spite of all, they did stay in my life, and they, in their own ways, they did give me a whole bunch of tools, not all of them, but they gave me a whole bunch of tools. And my mom specifically I felt with the tools she was given, she has had to build a lot of new tools that she's put to good use. And she's been very helpful to my family and my kids and myself. So I think this is a lifelong pursuit that will never end, like that of rebuilding. But I feel so much better about that relationship than I did, 17 years ago, let alone 40 years ago. Yeah.
Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.